Hello and welcome back to the Consistory of the Coelc YouTube channel. I'm your host for this video, Reverend Zabel of St John's Evangelical Lutheran Church, located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia. Today I wanted to do a video on the topic of Superseccionism and the visible church. So previously I did a video on the topic of Superseccionism and whether Lutherans are Supersessionists and what that doctrine is. Now, basically, in short, the doctrine of supersessionism is that the church has replaced Israel as the people of God. And I don't really like saying that Lutherans are supersessionists. I don't really fully agree with the idea of supersessionism in the sense that we're talking about the invisible church. If we're talking about the visible church, then yes. So the idea is that when the new covenant supersedes the old covenant, the church supersedes Israel as the people of God. And that is true in regards to the visible church on earth. See, in the Old Testament, God's people were identified with the Abrahamic people, particularly the nation of Israel. First you have Abraham and his family, then Isaac and his family, then Israel and his family, and then that grows into the tribes of Israel, the nation state of Israel, that gets split into the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern nation of Judah. The northern nation becomes like the Samaritans, the southern nation remains the Jewish people, and so then the Jewish people are identified as kind of God's people on earth. But this is only in regards to the visible church. The nation state of Israel and the Jewish people were only God's people in the visible outward sense, which is then replaced now by the physical church on earth. But in regards to the invisible church, as in the true believers who are going to heaven, this has never been based on race, but has always been based on faith, even in the Old Testament period, even the period of the Old Covenant. See, in the New Testament, when Jesus is talking to the people at the synagogue in Nazareth, and they think they're saved because they're descendants of Abraham, Jesus corrects them by bringing up the account of the widow of Zarephath and Naaman the Syrian, or Naaman the Aramean, because he was from Aram, Damascus. And see, Jesus says, look, Elisha could have gone to any widow in Israel, but he went out to the widow of Zarephath. And why was that? Because none of the widows in Israel had faith, whereas the widow of Zarephath had faith. And the widow of Zarephath, she was not Jewish, she was not an Israelite, she was a Sidonian, of the same people as Jezebel, the woman trying to kill Elijah. And God says, go to her because she has faith. Naaman, the Aramean, gets healed. And God said, look, Elisha could have gone to any leper in Israel, but he didn't because they didn't have faith. He went and healed Naaman, the Gentile, the foreigner, because he had faith. We see throughout the Old Testament lots of people who are not Jews by blood, but they're considered part of God's people by faith. There's Rahab the Canaanite, who becomes an ancestor of Jesus. There's Uriah the Hittite. And there is Ittai the Gittite. Gittite is from Gath. This is a Philistine person. These people are considered God's people not by race, not by ethnicity, not because they belong to the nation state of Israel, but because they had faith in God. Compare this then to people who were ethnically Jewish, who did belong to the nation state of Israel, and yet weren't saved. Firstly, you have in the times of Elijah that there are so many people that don't worship the one true God, who are worshipping Baal, and Elisha thinks that he alone is the only one left who is a true believer. And God comes to him in the still small voice and says, no, you're not alone. There are still more than 3,000 in Israel who haven't bowed the knee to Baal. Now that is meant to be a comfort to Elijah to say, you are not the only believer left. There are still another 3,000 with you. But think about this from the other perspective. There were more than 3,000 people in Israel. There would have been hundreds of thousands of people living in Israel at that period of time. And God is saying there are 3,000 of them who are still true believers. 3,000 who belong to the true church, who belong to the invisible people of God. There are many who belong to the visible people of God, to the nation state of Israel, but they did not believe in God. You also have this reinforced in the book of Jeremiah, where Jeremiah condemns the people of God, the Jews, the Israelites, and he condemns them because they are circumcised according to the flesh, but not according to the heart. And he says God's going to judge you and condemn you. So even though they were outwardly Jewish, they were ethnically Jewish, racially Jewish, belonged to the nation state of either Israel, or in this case with Jeremiah, Judah or Judea in the south, yet they didn't have faith. And so they weren't part of God's true people. And so we get this then when we get to the book of Romans, where Paul is talking about how God's people is an olive tree, which is the descendants of Abraham, but the unbelieving Jews are broken off, and then the believing Gentiles, who aren't descended from Abraham, they get grafted in. And so it's not so much that the church supersedes Israel, because the true people of God, the true church, the true invisible people of God, has always been those who have faith in God. The only thing that has changed is the outward visible signs of the church. No longer is the people of God the nation state of Israel or the ethnically Jewish people. It's the church. Those who confess belief in Jesus. Those who gather around word and sacrament. And even within their midst, there are unbelievers. We as Lutherans teach that in the church there are true believers and hypocrites. Those who might outwardly be visibly a Christian but are inwardly an unbeliever. They may belong to the visible church on earth, but not to the true invisible church. The true church of God is invisible, and it has always been invisible. And the true church of God, the true invisible church, has always been based on grace through faith. Has always been based on salvation by faith, not race, not membership in an organization. And so when we talk about supersessionism, it is only in regards to the visible church on earth. The people of God are no longer identified by the outward signs of the temple and the nation state and the sacrifices and circumcision. No, now we are identified by the outward signs of gathering around word and sacrament. In religion, we sometimes talk about the marks of the church. The only things that have changed are the marks. The true church has always been those who have faith. The only thing that has been superseded is the outward marks of the church. You know, circumcision got replaced with baptism. Sacrifice got replaced with Holy Communion. The temple and the nation state of Israel got replaced with the church. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.